So we're live now,
Oh no. Who knew we would be live again?
Us, every week, except for next
Us.
week. So hello everyone who is waiting, or one person, two people. I assume the second person who's just joined is you, Tim. Hello everyone who is waiting.
I've only just joined now. Yeah. Morning. Oh, now there's only one watching. I don't know what's happening. It doesn't matter.
It's alright, people tend to join a few minutes in.
Yeah. So what have you been doing this week, Alex?
Well, I've been doing, first of all, my examinations, which is why I was not on stream last week. But also I've been, what else have I done? Good question. Podcast stuff. I've been working on the podcast yesterday.
Yes.
Had two interviews for the Growth Mindset episode part 2 with Associate Professor Melanie Pope, and a second with the head of the library, John Hill. And they're both really interesting. I'm looking forward to getting them out there once they do eventually come out.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the whole series. My wife's yelling at someone on the phone, I think, behind me. So if you hear anything, that's her. We're doing pension stuff. It's really good fun.
That's fine. The last time I was in the live stream 2 weeks ago, I think it was, we had Naomi's youngest child on stream. So you could have your wife if you want. We have my cat
I don't
before.
think she wants to be. Yes, we have had your cat. Yes. We need a library cat. We need an official library cat, I think. I've petitioned before for this. But we don't seem to be getting one, and it's a bit frustrating. To be fair, we have got 5 libraries, so we'd need 5 library cats to make it equitable, wouldn't we?
Well, maybe we do a pilot. We ask people to do a pilot scheme where we have one library cat to prove that the library cat is worthwhile. Like, just imagine the argument: students will want to come to the library if we have a library cat because they can see a cat.
Except if they are cat allergic.
That is true. In which case, we need to have a library that's accessible.
Yes, and I don't know if this is true or not, but according to the security officers over at Chesterfield, where I'm normally based, there's internal sensors. So if there is a cat in the building at night, it'll set off the alarm all the time, which is possibly not a great solution.
Probably not. No, I think there's not. I think there's the dreams of the library cat when there. I know there was a cat that lived in one of the halls. It just sort of just went there and would go into people's rooms. And one of my friends was telling me that the cat was in his room, and the rules are you have to let the cat out of your room, and the cat will probably never see you for 3 months. But it just was like, oh, hello, whose room can I go to today?
Yeah. They have, I'm not a cat person, let's be honest.
I am.
In fact, yeah, I know you are, so I'm being very careful with what I'm saying. But they do offer a bit of distraction and joy, don't they? I think maybe we should have a shed with a cat in it. Is that rude? Like a cat shed?
Yeah. I mean, the at Keele University, where they have an area which just has roaming cats because there's just feral cats there. And
hedgehogs. We need hedgehogs as well.
Well, we have just passed our Bronze Hedgehog Friendly Campus Award as the University of Derby.
Have we got any hedgehogs though on the campus? Or any campus?
I mean, we've got a campus that's friendly to them. I don't know. I've not really been involved in it too much, but I know that there's been some really good work by the university to make us safe and friendly for hedgehogs.
Are you saying that nobody has counted the hedgehogs yet?
They probably have. You do hedgehog surveys, but I don't know if people do them.
Surveys.
That's not that fun. That's they're really simple.
That sounds like a research method. Oh, what method are you going to use? I'm going to be using a hedgehog survey.
Hello, Naomi. So yeah, you literally get you put some food out and you have like ink traps, and the hedgehog will walk in the ink, and it will then mean that you can see their footprints on some paper.
Oh, I'm replying really cool. As Dr. Clumber. Yeah. See, a tiger in the zoo lives in a cage, doesn't he? Aha! So there you go. I think you can have cats living in sheds. Tigers are a lot bigger than cats.
I assume it should have access to, get outside and whatnot. What do you think? Do you think it would be interesting to have a library cat or even a library hedgehog?
We need a library hedgehog.
Hedgehogs are so smelly. If you
leave them outside, you don't want them inside. Like foxes, they're very smelly. We have got foxes at Chesterfield. Do you know that?
No, I've only been there twice.
Oh, when it snowed last week, before spring all of a sudden burst into life this week, I arrived and I saw the trails, the footpaths of foxes, and it had puppies. It had 2 puppies with it. So then we had a big debate about what a puppy for a fox is called.
I don't know. I don't actually know the name, but I'd call them foxen.
No, they're not foxen. A vixen is a female fox, I think. They're cubs.
Yeah.
I think that's what we arrived at. I think they're cubs anyway. Let us know if you know any better. But a fox cub, I think, is yeah. So we've got that at Chesterfield, which is very exciting. And the other day I saw a peregrine as well.
Pups, it says.
How cool is that?
It says pups on Google. It also
really?
says, yeah.
I thought they were cubs.
It says young. So females who are young at cubs, pups or kits.
Oh.
And male fox.
Youngs as cubs. Oh wow, okay.
It could be anything.
Really not,
I think it's about as confusing as what foxes make in terms of their noise.
They don't make noise, I think. They squeak. Oh, they do. They do make noise. I hear them every now and then because we've got city foxes here, and they do.
Naomi has weighed in. She said that she thinks they're called cubs. I don't know. I would literally just Googled it. No real research there. Just literal Google. See what it says. I'm not going to rely on it too much, and I'm not too opposed if I am incorrect with what Google has told me.
The nice thing and my excuse that I will stick to is I'm foreign, so I'm allowed to get it wrong. I don't know what they're called in Dutch either. The things. Yeah. Anyway, doesn't matter. So we've established that we need a library cat. Do we need a library dog? I think we need a library dog.
Yeah,
we certainly need one of those. Well, anybody who wants to walk it. Dogs don't mind as long as they get walked. But they could be a therapy dog. You know, when we get them in.
I saw the union have done a few events with therapy dogs.
Yeah. I think that would be cool.
So, today we're going to be talking about dissertations, and something that I'd like to do is to answer some of your questions. Well, I'm not going to be answering your questions. Tim is going to be answering the questions. But it'd be interesting to see what questions you have, because we can really tailor today. So if you've got any questions whilst we're waiting, do let us know in the chat. It'll be really interesting.
We're not supposed to talk about the topic yet.
I mean,
you're supposed to ask me what I've done this week. I've done something
Tim,
very exciting.
What have you done this week in less than 1 minute?
In less than 1 minute? You're not bossy at all. I have had my vaccine yesterday.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'm not feeling great, I have to admit, but I've had it, so I'm saving the planet now, as you put it earlier.
For the greater good.
I'm mainly interested in saving myself, to be fair, but
greater good of him.
It's good. Yeah.
Greater good of the world. Greater good of the UK, and anyone who will be around you and with you.
Yes, and you need to protect national treasures. No, don't worry. I'm not that big-headed. It's fine. It was actually quite funny because I was eligible on the grounds of being a large fellow, as they call it, and the fellow before me was even larger, and then we were joined by 2 other fellows. So I immediately knew we were in the right queue, if you see what I mean. Except that I went to the wrong practice, didn't I? I went to my regular GP. I got there, nobody was there. They didn't even have the door open, so I had to knock on the window. And then the lass who opened the door said, "Are you here for your jab?" And I said, "Yeah." "You're in the wrong place. You need to be in middle practice." Oh, God. And that's like, half an hour's walk. So fortunately, I could rely on lovely Sandra, my wife, picking me up and dropping me off, because otherwise it would have been a bit of a drama, I think. But I got my vaccine. I got Pfizer, and it made me feel pretty rough yesterday. And I'm still not 100%, I have to admit. We talked about this earlier, Alex. So if I all of a sudden fall off stream, it's because I've reacted adversely.
Okay, well, we've got 10 seconds left before we begin, and then I'll give a warning about that when we start. 5, 4, 3. And hello, everyone. We are live. Today, talking all about dissertations with our usual regular library live stream. So, hello, Tim.
Hello, you've learned so well, Alex. I only had to tell you once not to count the last few seconds.
I definitely did it last time. I definitely counted it last time because I noticed myself while I was editing it. But don't worry, I fixed it today.
Yes.
So, Tim, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about the joy of dissertations or independent study or whatever you want to call it. So we're going to, I think the way we set it up, Alex, is that you're going to ask me questions because you've actually not written a dissertation yet, which is interesting.
No, I've helped with my partner doing hers a little bit, but I've never actually had the opportunity to write one. But I am going to be writing one at the end of next year or this year. I'm going to be writing one fairly soon, so it's really good for me to get some advice and ask the questions I've got, but also a good opportunity for you in the audience today to ask any questions you've got about dissertations, and we'll talk about and outline the entire process of a dissertation. And
Yes.
Tim will give his advice at each stage, and I'll ask the questions that I have, and we'll really get a good discussion going.
We should do, yeah. And it's, I think, one of the things, and we've not even talked about this yet, Alex, but it'll be a bit like your podcasts that you're currently recording. Tell us some more about that because I'm really excited about those.
Oh yeah, so in the future, coming on the 22nd of March 2021, we are going to be releasing the first episode of the Success as a Student podcast, which is all about the skills that make you successful. And a lot of those skills will help you with your dissertation, but also other things in terms of study, in terms of your future prospects and employability, both how you get a job and how you can perform in that job, and also your personal development so that you can become better at various things and learn things that you might always have wanted to do. So overall, huge series, huge scope of it. It'll help out anyone, whether they're a student or not, and it's going really well so far.
Yeah, it's a bloody big project, though. There's a lot of work involved, and you're doing really well with it. So well
Yep.
done, congratulations. I've had a sneak preview of one of the first episodes. I was quite mightily impressed, so that's really good. So, dissertations. Woohoo! Actually, I'm going to be totally honest here. I love doing research and research projects, and for me, the window into doing research, so that what opened it up for me when I realized I had an interest in the academic process was then when I did my first dissertation way back when I was a wee young lad over in the Netherlands. But yeah, that really hyped me up. And it actually taught me so much as well. I think that's the really cool thing because you could pick a topic. We're going to talk about this more in detail, but you could pick a topic that you find interesting and then study it. How cool is that? That's just a golden opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about it. What do you want to know, Alex? Where do you want
Well,
to begin?
first of all, I'd like to talk about a little bit about dissertations, but I think we should just make a few clarifications about how general our advice is today. So dissertations, from what I've seen, are different depending on your subject. So there are differences, aren't there, Tim?
Yes, there's definitely differences. So sometimes you get a more structured dissertation format where the instructions basically give you a bit of a topic or an idea that you need to talk about. You get different word counts, so you get dissertations I know of that are only 3 or 5,000 words. You get them all the way up to 15,000 at undergrad, maybe even 20,000, and then at master's level or even further than master's level, you get them humongous. Like a PhD thesis, in a way, is a dissertation, and they can be up to 150,000 words quite easily.
Yikes.
So yeah, you get different word counts, different sizes, different remits, and all that. So one dissertation is definitely not the other, I will say.
So, with that in mind, everything we do today, I would take that with a pinch of salt. Of your dissertation might be slightly different, but a lot of what we say will apply to the general dissertation and most of them. So, what I'd recommend you do is have a look at what your dissertation looks like and tailor what we've said to that dissertation, because a lot of it will be very applicable, but there might be a few small changes to what we've said.
Absolutely, yes. Always make sure you check things against the guidelines and instructions that you've received. Always good advice that.
Mm-hmm. So often, Tim, students do their dissertation at undergraduate level when they're in their third year. But before the dissertation starts, is there any advice that you think students can bear in mind when they're planning for it in the future?
Yeah, so one thing that I think is really important, because it's usually one of the biggest pieces of work that you'll be doing as a student, it has to be about something that you're actually interested in. So if you're, sort of leaning one way to do this stage because you think it's going to be easy, I've come across this quite a lot. Oh, yeah, I'll do this because it's easy. You're probably not going to enjoy it. If that's your motivation for doing a dissertation, you're probably not doing it for the right reasons. So one of the things before you even get to the dissertation that you can do whilst you are a student, an undergrad, is looking at the topics that you found interesting, that you've studied in the last 2 or 3 years before you get to the dissertation. And that could be, anything. It could be a very broad topic, or it could be a very specific niche of a particular topic that you found interesting. And that will really help you to understand what you're going to write about. So you can actually prepare a dissertation in advance in a way by understanding what you're interested in and what you're not interested in. So a quick example for that is I deal with a lot of nursing students over in Chesterfield, and they have to do this station at the end of year 3, and they always seem to lean towards an area that they're really keen on. So one nurse is not another nurse. You can work in community, you can work in an ICU, you can work in A&E, and all of those work with different topics and different teams. And understanding that is something that drives your dissertation is important. When you get to it, it'll give you a better motivation to finish it, basically.
So that's really interesting. So I really should start looking now then if my dissertation starts in December or September, I think it starts actually. So I should start really thinking about it early to get my head around what topics I might choose.
Yeah.
That's good advice, Tim. So do you have any other advice in general for dissertations before we get to some specific advice?
I think, like I said, the key is that you will have to enjoy it, because it will be a big piece of work. If you've never written a 5,000 or 10,000 or 15,000 word document before, if you are setting about writing something that you don't enjoy, you're going to struggle with it and you're really going to fight it. I also think that it's important to be realistic. So one of the things, and this applies the further on you get in your studies, but PhD students, for example, really suffer with this. They feel that their study, their research has to change the world. It really doesn't, right? So it's about the process, about learning, about your development more than anything else. And don't go into a dissertation, whether it's undergrad or master's or PhD level, thinking you're definitely going to publish from it and you're definitely going to be making the news because you've got such a world-breaking, innovative idea that you're writing about. It tends to not work like that. So make sure you're realistic about your own expectations as well, and make sure that you map them against what is expected for the module, for the course that you're on, what their requirements are, so you actually meet those requirements as well. I would say those are the key bits of advice in general, I would say.
So have a look into what type of things are expected from me. So I think I've already got some guidance on that already that I can have a look at. Make sure it's something that I enjoy, so have a look at what I enjoy so far. And the third thing that you mentioned was to be realistic. So would you recommend then, if I have some ideas already, do you think I should start speaking to one of my lecturers to see if they think it's realistic or feasible?
I wouldn't start that too soon. So you mentioned next December, so you've still
September
got a
is
year.
actually when it is, I've remembered.
Oh, September. Yeah, if it's September, you could start thinking about that. Because one of the things, I don't know, it differs per program and how they've set it up. But in some programs, you're able to actually select your supervisor as well for your dissertation. So if you're actually early, it means that a lecturer that you're interested in working with, because they understand the field, something like that, might be available. Whereas later on, later you leave it, the less likely they are to be available because of divvying the workload, basically. So it's definitely worth already having an idea of what area you want to go. But I wouldn't be too defined on it. So I wouldn't say, I want to do it about property law, and I want to look in particular at tenants at, in this particular area and the things that are going wrong. If you're going to go property law, that's good because you know that you need to find a lecturer that understands property law, but that's about it. I wouldn't actually start specifying it until I've had a bit of a think and a conversation about it.
Definitely. I think the key for me is I would probably try and choose an area that I find interesting, and I currently struggle with that area, so I definitely try and put that one on what I avoid, even though there's a lot to research in that area. If I'm doing it for half a year, that's a long period of time that I'll be working on that project. And
Yeah.
I think something that you were going to mention later potentially is, what do you do when you start to struggle with burnout potentially on that dissertation, and having a fun topic can already help alleviate that problem, reduce that problem, or stop it from happening.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's really good advice, Tim. So we've already mentioned a little bit about choosing a topic and a question, but do you have any other advice that you would give for that stage?
Well, the pre-stage before you actually start.
So when you're choosing your topic.
Well, Well, I think we've covered it, Alex, to be honest. So make sure it's something that you're interested in. Make sure that you don't get too defined on it, and make sure you understand that you're not going to, change the world because of a dissertation.
Sounds good to me. So Tim, after you've chosen your topic, then what is the next step in the dissertation that students need to look at?
So this is where we're going to talk about the diamond, I suppose, in a way. The Derby Diamond. If you haven't seen it, look it up. It's on our YouTube channel somewhere. I do a lovely 1.5 minute, I think, explanation of how to do it. But the key to any successful dissertation is understanding the subject that you're studying. So once you know what your question is and you've defined that question, you've talked to your lecturer about this is what I want to do for my dissertation. That's when the research phase starts, and it really depends again on what type of dissertation you're doing, whether you're expected to do field research or whether you're expected to do literature research, and get clear on what that is. Oh, Alex, you found it. Well done. Get clear on what it is that you need to do. But any good dissertation starts with doing desk research, and desk research basically is a word for sitting at your desk and finding out what literature is available to you on that particular topic. So I will use an example. I studied Cultuurhuis for my first dissertation in the Netherlands. Cultuurhuis is a Danish word for a way that library and public buildings are clusters. So in smaller communities, up to 10,000 people in Denmark, quite frequently you will find a Cultuurhuis, which is a library, a community center, local radio could be in it, local newspaper could be in it. It brings all these different things together. A lot of them have voluntary elements as well. So it's literally a house of culture, to translate it. And I started researching that because I found that idea really interesting, but also because the people that I was volunteering with were looking at a new library and were struggling, with the finance of it and what could they achieve and all that sort of stuff. So um, what I did first, it was a relatively new phenomena, was see what is in the literature. What did people write about this? Because once you start to understand what people have already written about, you can also begin to sharpen your understanding of that topic, but also start to identify whether there's maybe a gap that people haven't talked about that you find interesting, and all those things. So the first really important step is always, as soon as you've got a sort of generic topic, starting to read and starting to get an understanding of the topic.
I think that's probably a really important thing to highlight, and I think it's definitely something I'll do. So, when do you recommend doing this then? So, when do you recommend starting this reading?
So it really depends on how your academic year is structured. If you have the time to, you might as well start even before you do your dissertation. So officially, the designated time for it. You can start reading about it beforehand, because you can, even if you don't know the specific topic, if you know an area, if you know a field, by doing a literature search and by looking at the literature that's available, you can actually find interesting topics. So you could encounter, as we call it, it's called, what do we call it again? There's a word for it. No, it's literally information encountering. I'm trying to remember who wrote it. But by reading up on a particular area, you might well encounter something that you find really interesting. So one of the things that I found with the Cultuurhuis that I wasn't aware of before I started is that the Danish model works because local councils tend to fund all these different units, if you like. So they fund public libraries, they fund the local community center, they fund etc. etc. And because they do that, they're able to develop these nice, wonderful buildings. Some of them, there's examples, villages with 1,000 people, where there's a beautiful local community center with a well-stocked library and everything on it. So yeah, that really appealed to me, and I encountered that by accident, just by doing my field research.
So, it's really interesting actually, because I think it would help actually if you start reading early for you to tailor that question to something actually that could be original and well researched and that you'd enjoy. But also, it might be good. It's a bit like work experience, almost like you can test if you're actually going to enjoy this area and if it has legs before you start. And so you might actually find this area isn't for you, or this specific question isn't for you, and then you can do another one. Do you think that is right?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. So again, harking back to something I know, like the nursing field, quite frequently nursing students with a dissertation end up in the trap that they're studying something really medical that isn't really to do with nursing. It's more to do with a medical study, if you like. So, the efficacy of a medicine or something like that. And that's really difficult. So the sooner that you've got an idea of what you want to do, the sooner you can get told, actually, this is the wrong route, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's benefit in that as well, I think. But yeah, starting a bit earlier and finding an area that you like is really, really important, I think.
So after you've done a bit of initial research, then what's the next phase in the dissertation process, Tim?
So again, it really depends on the shape of the dissertation, but the once you've got the initial question sort of formulated and agreed with your lecturer, with your supervisor, that's when you start to pull in even more literature and you start to think about what you want to achieve with your dissertation. So if you're doing a desk research based dissertation, which is one where you only do literature review and draw things from the literature and write about that and give your opinion or your sort of learned findings exactly about the area, then that's great. All you have to do is more research, write notes, and make it happen, basically. If you also have to do field research at this point, it would be a good idea as well to start thinking about how are you going to do that. So, for example, are you thinking of doing a survey? Are you thinking of actually interviewing people, doing a focus group? And what does that actually mean? What are the ins and outs with that? So, and again, it will have to be authorized as well. So if you're going into the field to do a study, you might well have to apply for ethical approval. That sometimes happens within the department. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that happens outside the department at university level. So you need to be really aware of that, and it's worth investigating what your requirements and needs are for that.
So you saw, this is the methodology phase, is that right?
Yeah, so, well, it's the method phase. So there's a distinction between method and methodology.
Yep.
And for undergrad dissertations in general, I would recommend you start thinking about your method of collecting the data, and that will inform what sort of methodology you're using. So the difference there is that the method is how you collect the data, and the methodology is how you interpret the data. And it's a bit tricky because technically you're supposed to think about your methodology first, about your philosophy, about how you are approaching the research, what your view of the world is, etc., etc., etc. So if you're doing a master's or PhD, that's definitely where you start. If you're doing it as an undergrad, you're more likely to be using method over methodology. So you're going to be doing an interview, and if you're going to be doing interviews, how many interviews do you need? What are the consequences of the amount of interviews you have? What do you need for data collection, data analysis? That's a better way, a clearer way, I think, for undergraduates to start thinking about it. But again, that's very generic because in some cases you will have to do a proper methodology and work from a proper methodology. So again, make sure that you check that with your lecturer.
So when you think about your method, is it worth also considering what outcomes you want in the end? So what type of outcomes you're trying to get?
This is where bias might kick in. Ooh. So it's really dangerous to study something because you want to prove something, right? So if you're doing, I won't go into too much detail, but we're getting in the area of positivism and interpretivism or constructivism. We're talking about qualitative and quantitative. If you're doing interviews or a focus group, you're likely to be doing qualitative study. And you don't want to go in with the idea of finding something because you will actually close your eyes to other options that are out there as well. If you're doing a positivist study and you're actually trying to prove like a chemical formula, for example, or whatever else is, then you do need to hypothesize, as it's called. So you write the hypothesis, you say, I think if you mix water with soap, you get bubbles. I'm going to test it. You then write up how you're going to test it based on scientific methods. So that's a very different thing. So we're sort of straying, I think, into what is research and how do you do research, which is really difficult as a balance for your dissertation, which is why I said that at undergrad level, I would think more from the method approach rather than the methodology approach, because you can get... with my PhD, for example, it took me a year just to decide on methodology, what my philosophical approach was, and all that sort of stuff. I don't recommend you do that for your dissertation. You're probably not going to have the time for it.
No, probably not. So with the methodology, so with the method, then, do you have any advice for how students can decide what method works for them, and also if that method doesn't work, how can they go about switching that method?
So that's a really good question, Alex. I'm pleased to ask that. I'm going to react to Naomi in a second as well. But the method, a good way of finding out what sort of method might work is finding research papers that deal with the same sort of topic that you're wanting to deal with. So, for example, if you're interested in customer service, how do you measure customer service? You may find that the easiest way to get an analysis of customer service is the amount of positive reactions left on what, at the airfield, you get those 5-star, how happy were you today, with smiley face and a frowny face. And
Yeah, I wouldn't have said the airfield, but I would have
well,
said
or the station, or they happen to be in places, don't they?
yeah.
Actually, the guys that invented that are really rich now, which really annoys me because I could have thought of that plan, couldn't I? Like a paperclip. Anyway, if that is what the data that you've got, then that sort of decides the method that you are going to use. Because if you already have a body of data, then it makes sense to understand how you're going to analyze that. If you're collecting the data, it's really important to think about what am I collecting and how am I collecting it and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's difficult to give a generic answer because it really depends on the method that you want to use. But a great way of finding the method that you're using is by looking at what seems to be the norm in your field. So customer service, you could look at those 5-star, bing, 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 bing. But you could also look at interviews with customers. So that's a very common technique. I've actually been interviewed years ago, and this is a really weird one, I suppose. When I was a student in the Netherlands, I got interviewed by a marketing company that were researching whether a tobacco brand should open a restaurant because they were looking to diversify the business, and what they wanted to do was have a chain of restaurants that were named after the tobacco brand. And, we got interviewed, and my response was, even though at the time I smoked, so even though I smoke, I wouldn't want to eat in a restaurant that I associate with smoking. They disagreed, apparently. A lot of people apparently thought it was a great idea. That restaurant actually opened and lasted about a year before it had to close because people didn't want to eat there because, it was associated with smoking. Anyway, that's an anecdote.
So what you're thinking about then, the point that you made was, when you're doing your research to get your eyes on the topic, also have a look at the methodologies that other people who've been successful in your area have used. Yeah. And also, if you did what you did, for example, you can look at their methodology of how they did their research and conclude, okay, why did that methodology not work? And why? Exactly. So it's really evaluating what other people have done and benefiting from their processes and seeing what other people have done in the past.
Yeah, one of the things to realize is that in academic publishing, there's a bias towards successful studies. So people that write an article about why their methodology or method didn't work tend to not get published, which is really rather annoying because we can learn so much from why something didn't work as well.
Probably more than if people have just got pot lucky at times.
Yeah, or always use the same methods and the same methodology and know exactly what they're doing with that. So I think it is relevant to understand that. So if you're looking at the journal articles, be aware that a lot of them, that because they've been peer reviewed, they should be peer reviewed. Make sure you check that. But if they've been peer reviewed, it tends to be a successful approach, and that means that if you adopt that approach as well and get an understanding of that approach, you're likely to be adopting a successful approach. Shall I just address Naomi's question because she's asked something in the chat? So Naomi said I had to do primary research. Primary research is where you actually conduct research, so that's one way of doing a dissertation. But I was terrified of doing anything that involved talking to other people. So I did a conversational analysis from transcripts of debates in Parliament. I think it would have been much stronger if I had the confidence to actually talk to people. So there's two things there. If you're using transcripts of existing content, if you like, it is still primary research, right? Because you're actually using direct... Oh, have you clicked something that you shouldn't click? Oops. All right, okay. So, those transcripts are equally valid. The difference with having transcripts and doing it yourself, having the interviews yourself, is that if you do the interviews, you actually have more influence to get more data if you want to. So interviews are really powerful. Oh, I just saw the oops, yeah. Interviews are really powerful because they help you to get a follow-on question, for example. So when I did interviews for my PhD, it was really good to go, hang on, how do you mean that? You know, what is it exactly that you've just said? I want a bit more information. Or, you know, do you think it's a successful way of doing it if they're not very clear about it? That you feel it was successful? That you feel it was something that was difficult? So interviews give you that richness, and that's why it's called qualitative as well. They give you a richness that where the numbers don't really matter. It's about,
Yeah.
you know, the getting really good quality information. So if you're on the fence about doing interviews because you're a bit scared about them because they seem like a lot of work, my advice would be, if you can do it, if you feel like you can do it, because you will get more out of doing interviews, I think.
I totally agree. I just know that even with this podcast series, that I've been working on at the moment, if I just send everyone the text messages with my questions on and they'd answered them, a lot of the richness comes from the fact that I ask follow up questions and I learn things and I ask questions that I didn't even know were possible and
Yeah,
get outcomes. So you're limited by the questions you've asked if you just do a survey instead, for example. Whereas
yeah,
if you do in person interviews, you can ask those follow up questions, which
yeah.
can be really useful.
This is where, so I can immediately, and it's turning into a bit of a research stream. Let us know if you find that interesting, if you want more of this, because we can do more of it. But what's really interesting is that that's where bias kicks in as well, unconscious bias or conscious bias. And that's something to be really aware of. So in research, we've got two terms. One is objectivism and one is subjectivism. And objectivism is usually associated with quantitative studies. Subjectivism is usually associated with qualitative studies. And basically, it's about your position as a researcher. So, with objectivism, you're putting yourself outside of your research. You're not part of the research. With subjectivism, you're subject to the research. You're part of the research. And a lot of people get this wrong. Even, you know, really well trained, highly qualified professors don't quite get that and always struggle with that particular concept. So, if you're doing an interview, be aware of your biases, is something that I will say.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if you think something's really cool, so my PhD was on social media. I'm quite a fan of social media. I like social media. So I was always at risk of going, oh, why do you think it's stupid? That's stupid that you think it's stupid. Right. And if you go down that lane
Mm.
in an interview, you're not going to achieve anything because, you know, you're judgmental about it. So it's really important to understand bias and how to deal with that.
There's also biases in the questions that you choose to ask as follow up questions.
Absolutely.
I know
Yes.
for a fact that there's definitely subjective bias in the series that I'm making because if someone says something that links to an idea that I think is good, I'm going to highlight that. And then that will get into the episode because I've highlighted it. Whereas if something
Yeah.
that they've mentioned that I might not understand or might not know about its value, I might not get that out there if I don't ask the right
Absolutely.
questions. So there is subjective bias
Absolutely.
definitely in those.
Yeah, and you know, I could talk about this literally for days. What I find really interesting in relation to that is we've got, fortunately, we're now finally talking about, you know, equality, diversity, inclusion, and well-being, about Black Lives Matter. It's LGBTQ plus History Month, and we're talking about whether those voices are represented, and that's so important, right? So, I'm acutely aware, for example, I work in libraries, I'm a manager in a library, and I'm a white middle aged male. And weirdly enough, a lot of management positions in libraries, proportional to the workforce, are men in management roles. So why is that? Right? And when you start thinking about that, not just in research, but just in general, you can get so much more out of life and understanding of what's right and wrong by actually understanding your position of privilege and things like that. So, if you, just to give you a concrete example of how that might impact on your dissertation, if you're going to interview people about a certain topic, let's say it's about patient care, and you're only interviewing your family members, you're automatically excluding a lot of people that, you know, have very different worldview, a very different experience of patient care. So it's really important that you keep that in mind and that you actually think about that when you are writing up your research as well.
So try and interview people from different cultures, backgrounds, with different
Yeah,
who might have different opinions. So don't just interview your friends, the classmates that have been in the same position if you've had the same classes as you,
yeah.
and so on. Try and interview people outside of the norms that you already know. Otherwise, you'll be putting it in a bubble, which then means that it might
Yeah.
not be objective. It'll be in that subjectivity bubble.
Absolutely. Having said that, let's be honest, for the dissertation at undergrad level, this sort of topic isn't that relevant. It's more, again, when you get towards your master's and your PhD, where this starts to become an issue. Yeah.
Okay then, Tim. So we've talked about doing your research quite a bit. We didn't
hmm
mention much about ethics. So do you have any advice for students if they are going through the ethical process?
Yeah, so with ethics is really interesting, right? So ethics are the scaffolding that we use to make sure that we actually don't harm anybody or anything in our research. And it's usually governed by the university itself. At the University of Derby, we've got a ethical committee, an ethical board per college or just in general, where people go through your ethical application. So the ethical application is basically a document that states this is what I have considered before going to do this study. Now, again, for undergrad level, quite frequently it will just be departmental consideration. So if you are doing field research, it might well be that you just have to ask your supervisor, "Can I do this?" And then it's absolutely fine. If you're publishing, if you're looking to get published with your research, you will need that higher level of ethical approval. There's a few things that I'm not going to go into too much detail because,
No.
again, it's a topic we can easily cover 2 hours on. But there's a couple of things you need to be aware of. Ethical approval when it comes to dealing with people under 18 is difficult, and under 18 also includes adults with
Learning difficulties.
yeah, learning difficulties, but also vulnerable adults. I think
Yeah,
is
that's
the
the word.
best.
That's the word.
Yeah, it's the best word. So when you are thinking about doing research, any sort of study, if you're in primary education, for example, and you do need ethics, be aware of that. That's always sensitive, always difficult. It means that lots of people have to sign forms to approve the study, etc., etc. The other group that's really difficult for ethics is healthcare. So the NHS has very strict, very stringent research rules regarding the ethics of doing a study with people. And, we've literally seen a real life example with the vaccination. So I mentioned earlier, I've been vaccinated yesterday and I had to sit down because the one I got was Pfizer, and someone I know got vaccinated earlier in the week, got the AstraZeneca one, and they didn't have to sit down for 15 minutes. And that's a direct result of ethical considerations around that product. So they had to go to the, I don't, is it NICE? I can't even remember who
I
authorizes.
think nice authorized things. I don't. I studied it very
Yeah.
briefly in medical law.
Some
A
organization
body.
somewhere, yeah, goes through the ethics of that particular product and says you need to do this, you need to do that. So it is really important. Is it important for undergrads? Talk to your supervisor and see if it is or not.
Definitely depends. I think one thing I'd just like to highlight is that if you do get rejected in ethics the first time, just keep going. Don't think that's the end of the road. I know that my partner got rejected 9 times because she was working with young people in hers, and she got the best. She got entered into a competition for dissertation of the year in the UK for geographies, and she got rejected 9 times at ethics. I don't think it's the end of the road if you do get rejected the first time.
No. The interior 9 times is quite excessive, I would imagine. But the purpose of that ethics committee is to make sure that your research meets certain guidelines. And if your first application gets rejected, seek advice, try to understand what isn't right, what is right, and then amend it and do it again.
Yep. So Tim, after you've gone through ethics and after you've done some research, what's the next phase of the dissertation that you'd like to outline?
So you get your ethics before you do your field research. So when
Yep.
you go into the field, you need to have your ethics in place, just to make clear. When you've done your research, you get to the analysis stage, and again, this is where methodology comes in. So for a lot of students, they will choose quite basic methodologies, so thematic analysis. So I've done 10 interviews. I'm going through the interviews and I'm identifying themes within each interview, right? And then I write about those themes. That's thematic analysis. Boom, I've got my dissertation analyzed. Fine. So it pays when you know what method you're going to use and how you're going to do that. It pays to understand the workload involved with actually filling out that part of the study. So if you're doing a survey how are you going to use, for example, SPSS, or how are you going to analyze the data you're getting in from that survey? SPSS is a statistical program that a lot of
Okay.
people use. So you need to do that, right? When you've got your data, you then need to analyze it. You need to draw conclusions from the data, and you need to write them up properly. And again, this is very different for very different research areas. Do it in the best way that you can. Remember those papers that you saw earlier that might give you a hand on what is important in terms of analysis. Do you need an R number? Within COVID, so let's use R numbers. Or do you need to, highlight particular areas? Whatever it is, this is where you do that. And it can actually take a lot of time, whether you've done quantitative or qualitative. So just organizing the data of 300 survey answers can be quite a big chore, and it can mean quite a lot of sitting behind your computer, moving stuff into Excel tables and all that. And that's just the way it is. So get on with it, I'd say.
So yeah, try and get on with it. Try and make sure you organise the data. Try and make sure you analyse it. Would you recommend with analysis being critical?
Yes, you have to be critical throughout. So critical is interesting because there's all sorts of connotations to that word in relation to research. But yeah, you have to be critical. You have to make sure that you test everything. So if you're doing a quantitative approach with numbers, if you calculated something, calculate it again. Use different methods to calculate it as well. Make sure you get it right. If it doesn't look right, it usually isn't right. And also be very careful. I have seen in the past with students who did do surveys that they slightly edited the data that they collected. So they would drop out certain survey answers that they didn't like and things like that. Don't do that, Always make sure you check in with your personal tutor or supervisor for the dissertation to make sure you understand what you're doing and how it should be done.
Do you think this stage would benefit from a timescale also in terms of planning a timescale for your dissertation?
Yeah, I think with the whole dissertation and the diamonds, referring back to that again, talks about this. You need to plan everything through. You need to understand what you're doing. So having a period of time when it comes to doing your desk research, not your desk research, sorry, doing your analysis is really important. And again, like I said earlier, be aware it can eat up time quite quickly. So doing a really good qualitative analysis, I've used grounded theory, for example. It means that you have to add keywords. Then you have to categorize all the keywords. And you do this on all your interviews. So if you've done 40 interviews that are an hour or 2 hours long, you can imagine how much text that you're actually dealing with. You've got to go through everything with a fine comb. It takes time, and be aware of that. It's not always fun. The other thing that really takes time is transcribing your interviews. If you're not experienced in transcribing, then you could be in real trouble, because you actually, if you've done 10 interviews for an hour, my ground rule is that you need 4 hours of time to transcribe 1 hour, and that's if you're experienced and have the right equipment. So you may well end up taking a whole working day to transcribe one hour interview. When you've done that 10 times, trust me, you're pretty cooked. You don't want to do it again.
So you need to make sure that you actually have enough time planned then. So when you are initially thinking about dissertation, your methods that you're going to use, bear that in mind then?
Absolutely, yeah.
So yeah, bear it in mind. So something that I recommend generally when people plan essays is to have time gaps, so where you've got some flexibility in your time. I think this would be probably more important in dissertations. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. If you work to deadlines all the time and leaving things at the last moment, with dissertations more than anything else, you're shooting yourself in the foot. So you will have a meeting with your supervisor where they go, I'm not happy about this, you're going to have to rewrite that, or I think you need to do more surveys, you need to get more data in. And those setbacks can really eat away a lot of time, because if you've done your analysis and all of a sudden you get the feedback that you need to try and get another 50 survey answers, that means you have to go out there and get 50 people to fill in your survey. That takes time, right? That just takes time. Time becomes such a commodity when you're doing a dissertation. So yeah, really important to plan ahead and actually draw on experience of others as well. So talk to your personal academic tutor, talk to your pals. You know, what did you do? Did it work for you? What didn't work? If you know anybody who's, for example, studying a master's and has already done a bachelor's degree, talk to them. You know, make sure that you get an understanding of what is involved. And like I said, you know, we keep coming back to it, but every subject area, they do dissertations differently. They have different rules and guidelines and methods and methodologies. So make sure that you check that very carefully as well, so you get an understanding of what you want to do.
Yeah, I think that's really important, especially talking to students in the years up above you to see what their experiences were and get their perspectives. I think you can learn a lot about what their reflections are. So I know some students in the years above me were saying about how they just were so busy. Ours were due in for March, and they were saying about how busy they were because they left it too late and they wished they started earlier. And then my friends were like, "Oh, so I start really early," and yeah, that worked for them, I think. So learning from the people above you is definitely important. So, Tim, what's the next phase, if there are any other phases of the dissertation process?
So now we get to the, according to some people, the most exciting, and according to some people, the most dreadful phase, and that's the actual write-up, isn't it?
So throughout this,
throughout this process, you've made loads of notes, you've done loads of writing already, and now comes the point where you have to fit it into the document that you are going to hand in. And again, this takes time. You know, writing just takes time. If you do it right, it costs you a lot of time. Make sure you get it right. So I'm trying to think of things that are relevant. I'm going to talk about someone who's doing a literature review in this case. So I'm going to stop talking about doing research and all that, because we can literally talk about that forever.
Yeah.
Let's say you've done a literature review. If you have seen my diamond video, you will know that you are taking notes whilst you are reading, and those notes actually become the foundation for what you are going to be submitting. And that's really important to understand. So that note taking during your reading is really key, because you will already write a lot of the content that you are going to be submitting later on. Your analysis, whether you've done a critical literature review or whatever else it is, your analysis of that literature is going to help you understand what you need to write in your dissertation. So that's the first thing. Make sure that you understand that you've already written a lot, and copy and paste that and use that. Never ever start writing the proper document by opening Word, having a blank screen in front of you, and go, okay, so I did this dissertation, blah, blah, blah. It's never going to be a good piece of work. Make sure you hark back immediately to the stuff that you've researched before. And then, you know, writing is writing. Some people can write 10,000 words a day. Well, that's probably a lot, but I can probably write 4,000 or 5,000 words a day without too much difficulty once I've done the research. Other people can write 200 a day. And you need to be aware of that. You know, if you've never written an essay, for example, it's going to take longer. At the same time, dissertation in a way is like writing your essay. You will know how many words you could put to paper, commit to paper, and how happy you are with it. You will also know whether you need to go back to it to redact it all, whether you need to edit it all or not. So don't be too scared of that stage. One of the things I always say is make sure, let's say you start your writing stage 20 days before your planned first draft. If you break down 10,000 words over 20 days, that's only 500 words a day. 500 times 2 is 1,000, plus 0 is 10,000. Yeah, I'm good at calculating. I know, I can see you. Right, so that's 500 words a day. You will want some free time and all that, so commit to doing 700 a day, right? If you go in with that attitude, you will break down that whole big mountain of 10,000 words really nicely.
It's so surprising how that works. Even with Revision, I've just read 2 400-page books, and I look at those and go, wow. But I just broke it down over time, and it worked. And so I assume the same with dissertations. Even if you can write less than that, just work out how many words you can write a day, and then work out how many days you need to write that with a gap.
Yeah, I was really, and sort of a bit of personal insight, but with my PhD, I was really struggling with my mental health at some point, sort of in the middle, and my write-up had been really floundering. And at some point, my supervisor said, Tim, if you just write 200 words a day, every working day, not even in the weekend, then if you count all that up, you will have finished your thesis before the deadline that we've set you. So just commit to those 200 words a day, and I did, and it worked, you know. And at some point, once you've started, once you get your 200 words done for that day, sit back, have a cup of coffee, do whatever you like. But you begin to write more and more and more because you're getting into the flow of it, and that's really important. So never beat yourself up, even if you only wrote a few hundred words. It's about doing it. It's about getting on paper, and then the very important thing. Sorry, Alex, to carry on, but have that second and third draft planned in. Your first draft is never going to be perfect. It's not intended to be perfect. You have to go back to that at some point and rewrite it, and that's normal. You have to calculate that as well.
Yeah, what I was thinking then is about how when we were talking about how planning time in, which don't just plan to finish writing like a few days before the deadline. You've got other stages as well, like adding your proofreading
Yeah,
it, which is what I call redrafting in my own eyes, and then referencing as well. That takes time too. Plus, if
yeah,
anything, if your dissertation supervisor looks at something and gives you feedback or setback, you need to be ready for that and have time planned in.
yeah.
At least that's what I think from what I've heard.
Please get in the habit. Please get in the habit. I'm not aiming this at you, Alex. But when it comes to referencing, as soon as you read something that you know that you will be using or likely to be using, write the reference straight away. Don't leave
Yep.
it until the last moment because you will forget where you read it. You will forget what book it was. You will have brought it back because someone reserved it, whatever it is. And all of a sudden you're scrambling around for an hour trying to remember what the bloody title was. Don't do that. Just do it when you've
Yeah.
got it. Yeah.
If you need any help with the referencing, I know I'm running a referencing workshop this afternoon, and that point is in there, Tim.
Yes.
100%, because it happened to me once in my second year. I'll discuss that later on. Or if you've already attended it, then you will have heard that story before.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Tim, after that stage, then, is there any other parts of the dissertation that you'd like to discuss at all?
Um, no, well, we've talked about the drafting. I think that is really important. I think there's something else that I do need to discuss, and that's that relationship between you and your supervisor is really
Definitely, yeah.
important. So, you're not doing a dissertation on your own, or you shouldn't be doing a dissertation on your own. You should be having contact with someone who's done that before, who understands what a dissertation is and what academic writing is and what that all means. Make use of that. It is so important to make use of that because they will actually be able to tell you what they're looking for in the dissertation. And even though it's not, you know, they're not going to proofread it and give you direct pointers of what you should be putting in and not putting in, it's your only contact with someone who knows that subject area better than you do. So use them. That's what they're there for. And don't. We talk about this a lot. Feedback is so valuable. Don't get disheartened if you get some negative feedback, or if you know, as long as it's constructive, it is valuable. So if someone says, "Look, I really don't like the way that you've constructed this paragraph, or this whole section doesn't read well. I don't understand what you're trying to say," that's really invaluable feedback because actually that means that you need to go over it again and fix it. If you don't get that feedback, you would have submitted it and you would have failed the station. That would be way worse, wouldn't it?
Yeah, feedback's an opportunity to improve and get better, and people who give you feedback are doing it to benefit you. It's far
Yes.
better if they give you feedback that's negative than to say it's okay and then they mark it and go, this is terrible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The other thing I will say is each academic tutor, each supervisor will have a set amount of time that they have to spend with you. Find out what that is, ask them, and don't try and exceed it. So, one of the things that happens that is really annoying for people that are academics, that are supervising these stations, is that some students are really needy to the point where it's unfair to the other students. So if you're emailing your supervisor every 3 seconds and expect an answer every 3 seconds, you know you're probably doing it wrong. You need to stand on your own feet because the this station, a lot of the time, the idea behind it is that you can stand on your own feet and that you demonstrate that you can. Because you know, at the end of the dissertation, you will be a graduate of the University of Derby. So if during the dissertation you still need lots of hand holding, then you know you're giving the wrong signals. Is basically what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's an independent study, and you have got
Yeah,
people there who can help you and guide you, but they are guides, not people who will write the work for you
yeah,
or do the research for you. They may occasionally if they're very nice, point you in the direction of a relevant paper that you should read, but they aren't going to read the paper for you, and they aren't going to put that work into your stuff. So
yeah, absolutely.
Use them for what they're there for, but don't abuse or overuse them.
Yeah, yeah.
I love how I'm giving advice, even though I'm not done a dissertation on
No,
this.
to be fair, Alex, a lot of this is related to what we talk about all the time anyway. You know?
I have supported a dissertation with which has done well in the past, and I've heard reflections of other people as well on that issue. So Tim, what happens if you get involved in a bad working relationship with that supervisor? Do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, this is always unfortunate. It can happen. One of the things I mention this early on. It always pays to try and get ahead with selecting a supervisor,
Yep.
And beating the queue, because it shows that you're interested. It shows that you're keen, and it helps with that relationship with that supervisor. Go on.
If you can pick your supervisor, because obviously
Absolutely, yeah.
So I continue.
Yeah, sometimes supervisors allocated, which is also a fair system. So if you don't get on with your supervisor, how do you deal with that? Well, firstly, understand your position to your supervisor. So what is it that you don't get on with? Are you not getting on with them because they're telling you that you don't understand what you're doing? Then you probably don't understand what you're doing. Are you not getting on with them because their behavior is grinding, and you feel like each time you go in you're being told off like a little child? Then there's possibly something more going on. So there's two things to keep in mind there. One is always ask advice from your union. That's what they're there for. We've got a wonderful advice team in the union, and if you feel like you have actually been aggrieved in any way, shape, or form by a personal tutor, talking to your union and also your union rep is very valid, and is a route that I don't think students use often enough and should be using a bit more. Also accept that if the union or your union rep says, well, I'm really sorry, but I don't think you've got a case here because you're a bit oversensitive about it or whatever it is, that could be the case as well. But if you are apologies, if you are oversensitive and if you feel like you're really struggling, there might be something else going on. And it's not rare for students who get to the dissertation stage, which is also sort of the crowning glory of your 3 years or however long you've been at university, to feel a bit overwhelmed with things and to actually, it's the end of a long chapter and it's a big piece of work. It's the one that decides your grade more than anything else. There's a lot of pressure as well. So make sure you reach out to understand that we've got a well-being service. They actually do training on how to deal with that sort of stress as well. Use the people around you to get over any problems you might have. It depends really personally which tutor you've got and who that tutor is. I have always found in my time as a student, and I've been a student for a long time, having done an undergrad and a master's and a PhD, that being open and honest with a tutor actually helps you to amend a relationship. So if you feel like you're being aggrieved, if you feel like there's something wrong, share it with them. Just say, hang on, I think you're treating me a bit wrong here. Don't be aggressive about it. Don't be angry about it. That doesn't help. But try and discuss it as well with that personal tutor. That's always important, I think.
Yeah, I think that's all really good, especially just talking to them is probably the best option, because they may not understand what your circumstances are or why, or that you even have a problem. So just discussing it with them, being open, being honest, being nice, being fair to them as well, because they probably are very, very busy people. I can imagine they have a huge workload. I don't know, Tim, you've done this type of thing before, and they'd want the best for you, but they also have to help a lot of other students out probably and do other lectures, so they will do their best for you in the time that they can reasonably give you, I can imagine. I don't know if you'd agree with that, Tim.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm not always sure students understand how busy academics can be, because teaching quite frequently is only part of the workload. There's a lot of research pressure as well. There's a lot of organizational management pressure. So it's not as simple as, oh, they're there for me and I should be able to contact them whenever I want them to. It just doesn't work like that.
It's very easy to think that lecturer only teaches your class.
Mm-hmm.
And so often you can then find out, without having any reason to even know, that they teach lots and lots of other classes, have lots of other cohorts to deal with, and so they're very busy people. at times. So just bear that in mind as well. And they also might have marking commitments as well that are huge at the same time for other assignments that you don't know about.
Yeah, especially with dissertations that take place over the summer, for example. Certainly in the beginning, there's a lot of marking workload because the exam period before you're starting your dissertation during the exam period or just after it. That means that your lecturer will have marking in early stages as well. So keep that in mind. Yeah, love your lecturers, love your library.
Yeah. They're there to help you. That's the key
Yeah.
thing that I think of. So, Tim, we've got 5 minutes left before we end the stream today. Is there anything that you think you would like to recommend students to do, or any further resources that you recommend that you'd like to talk about in the last 5 minutes?
Use us, the content that we create as a skills team. We are here for you. We try and get a lot of stuff done for you. So make sure you use that help that's available. With your dissertation, make sure it's a topic that you enjoy, that you want to be doing, and also understand that there is just a lot of pressure. Learn to cope with that and make that happen. But try and use it as a learning opportunity as well. I think that's really important. That sometimes gets forgotten. So in that example I gave with the cultuurhuis, I really learned a lot from that. Not just about that particular phenomenon, but about the interaction. You did that Windows thing again, Alex.
I know. It happens whenever you change tabs. I was getting some ebooks up.
Right. But yeah, I learned about interaction between councils and libraries and between different voluntary sectors and all that. So important. So try and make most of the opportunity you've got. Most people only ever do one degree, and therefore, try and learn. That's basically it. Alex, you bringing ebooks up probably means that you've got some more tips.
Yes, I have some ebooks that could be useful for students to read if they want further depth on anything that we've discussed today. I highly recommend reading a book. It's what I'm going to be doing in the next few weeks. After having interviewed them, I'm going to go and do some reading. I'm going to probably read one of the books that I'm going to show now. So I'm at the library homepage currently. As ever, this is the starting place that I usually start at. If you want to get here, you could just search University of Derby Library or get here through UDO or the main University of Derby website. But we have some useful ebooks and a dissertation skills guide that might be worth highlighting. So if you go to find subject information from the library homepage and scroll down to these tabs here, and you click on this, and then you go to our skills guide. So at the bottom right of the page, go into the skills guides and clicking on that. We then have a dissertation skills guide and an independent study skills guide, both very similar. Have a look at both of the different pages. But if we just go to the dissertation one for now, there are some really useful books that are here in the resources section, including this one here, which is available as an ebook. I think this one here is also an ebook. So if I click on this one, yep, you can view this one as an ebook. It's all about planning your dissertation. And that's quite small, very easy to read if you're not used to reading longer books. And that's all about thinking about the time and time constraints of planning for a dissertation. But there are also other books that are available for doing dissertations. So here's this one, also available as an ebook, about completing your master's dissertation, and then there is one about undergraduate dissertation. So do have a look at those. I'm going to be reading this one because I'm doing my dissertation at master's level.
Also, just to interject for a second, that planning a dissertation book that you showed, the little one, I think to buy that's only about £5-6. So if you want to have it, if you ever are in a Blackwell's or Waterstones, they could probably get it for you.
Yeah, I bought mine I think for £8, but that was when it first came out. Because I bought a bunch of those when I was a student. So yeah, these are books that are relevant. There's also all these tabs on this page as well, which have useful information about what Tim has discussed today, different stages. And yeah, hopefully you'll find that useful. So I'm going to transition back to me and you, Tim. So is there anything else to add before we end today?
We haven't got any more questions, so I think that's it, isn't it? We've done an hour. My chair is creaking, so I must be getting tired and needing to walk. I think that was. I hope that was interesting. I'm not sure if it was.
I think it was. I learned a lot, given the fact that I've not done one yet. So I think anyone who's watching or will be watching in the future has. So if you have found this useful, do leave us a comment to say that. Even if you're watching this back at a later date, it's really useful to see your feedback. Or if there's anything that we didn't talk about today that you might have wanted to talk about, let us know, because we can talk about that in a future live stream.
Yeah, if people want to know more about research topics, for example, about the methodology that we've talked about, maybe we could do something about that later on as well, because I find that personally very interesting. So I'm qualified to talk about it, so why not?
Yep, and I'm qualified to learn about it.
You are indeed, yes. Shall we wave?
Yep. Okay. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Ooh, titles. Have we got posh titles?
So today's live stream was brought to you by the University of Derby Library Skills Team. Today, Tim Zijlstra, or Dr Tim Zijlstra, sorry, the Library Experience and Skills Manager, you did a great job of discussing and outlining using your skills what a dissertation is and how to do one. Thanks also to Naomi Bowers-Joseph and to me for just sort of sitting here asking questions and learning. Love my job. And thanks to Stephen Plant for all the graphics that you have seen today.
Yes. And if you want to be on that panel at the end at some point and you want to take part in a live stream, this is a brand new idea, by the way, but just let us know. We'll see if we can find a space for you. Yeah.
Definitely.
Bye, Naomi.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.